The empress who murdered her own infant daughter to frame her rival was far more calculating than you can imagine. When you think of ancient Chinese rulers, you probably picture wise emperors surrounded by loyal ministers. But there was another story unfolding in the forbidden chambers of the Tang Dynasty palace. A story of a woman who would transform from a humble concubine into China's only female sovereign emperor, leaving a trail of blood that would stain the imperial throne for generations. What you're about to discover isn't just about political ambition. It's about how far a human being can go when the prize is absolute power over the most advanced civilization on Earth. The year was 624, and Chang'an's streets echoed with merchants hawking silk and spices, while Buddhist monks chanted in distant temples. But within the palace walls, a different sound would soon fill the air. The screams of tortured officials, the weeping of noble families destroyed overnight, and the silence of those who dared not speak against the woman who would become Zetian. What transpired during her reign was not merely a female ruler breaking gender barriers, but a systematic campaign of terror that would make Ivan the Terrible seem merciful by comparison. The popular imagination has sanitized Zetian into a feminist icon who challenged patriarchy. But the reality was far more sinister and infinitely more complex. If this story of power and terror fascinates you, make sure to subscribe to hear more dark tales from history that have been hidden from the public eye. Zetian entered the imperial palace at 14 years old as a low-ranking concubine to Emperor Taizong, selected for her exceptional beauty and intelligence. Contemporary accounts describe her as possessing an almost supernatural charisma, with eyes that could shift from warm invitation to cold calculation in an instant. She was educated, articulate, and possessed a memory so precise that she could recall conversations verbatim years after they occurred. Unlike other concubines who competed through beauty alone, Wu understood that knowledge was the ultimate weapon in palace politics. She spent her nights studying military strategy, law codes, and most importantly, the psychological weaknesses of those around her. The young Wu demonstrated an early talent for manipulation that would define her entire career. When Emperor Taizong fell ill, she strategically positioned herself near his son and heir, Li Ji, who would become Emperor Gaozong. The relationship that developed between them violated every moral code of the era. A concubine of the father becoming intimate with the son was considered an abomination that could destabilize the mandate of heaven itself. Yet Wu orchestrated their affair with such precision that when Taizong died in 649, she had already secured her future. The woman who should have been condemned to spend her remaining years in a Buddhist convent as tradition demanded would instead return to the palace as the new emperor's favorite. What made Wu particularly dangerous was her ability to present different faces to different audiences. To Emperor Gaozong, she was the devoted lover who understood his every need. To the Buddhist clergy, she was a generous patron who funded temples and sponsored religious texts. To the common people, she initially appeared as a reformer who would challenge the corrupt nobility, but behind these masks lay a mind that viewed human relationships purely as transactions of power. Court records from this period, discovered centuries later in sealed archives, reveal her keeping detailed notes on every person she encountered, cataloging their desires, fears, and potential usefulness with the precision of a military strategist planning a campaign. The transformation from concubine to empress required Wu to eliminate every obstacle with surgical precision. Her primary rival was Empress Wang, Gaozong's legitimate wife, who had actually supported Wu's return to the palace, believing she could use the concubine to distract the emperor from another favorite. This miscalculation would prove fatal. In 654, Wu gave birth to a daughter, and what happened next remains one of history's most chilling mysteries. The infant was found dead shortly after Empress Wang visited the nursery. Wu accused the empress of murdering the child out of jealousy, and the emperor, devastated by grief and manipulated by Wu's tears, believed her. Modern historians studying palace records have uncovered disturbing inconsistencies in the official account. The wet nurse who was present during the empress's visit disappeared that very night. Her family compensated with an unusually large sum of gold before vanishing from the capital. A court physician's private journal, discovered in 1992 during renovations of an ancient temple, contains a cryptic entry dated to that exact day. The fox has devoured its own young to feast upon the tiger. Was this metaphorical language describing Wu's unthinkable act? The evidence suggests that Wu Zetian strangled her own infant daughter, timing the discovery to immediately follow Empress Wang's visit, creating the perfect frame for murder. The aftermath of the infant's death triggered a palace purge that would establish the template for Wu's future reign of terror. Empress Wang and consort Xiao, another rival, were not simply executed, but subjected to tortures that shocked even the hardened palace guards. Wu ordered them beaten with wooden paddles until their bones broke, then had them thrown into wine vats, where they slowly drowned over several days. Before their deaths, she reportedly visited them, saying, "Now you two witches can get drunk to your heart's content." Their families were exterminated to the third degree of kinship, meaning that cousins, their children, and even infant grandchildren were executed to prevent any future revenge. As Wu's power grew, so did her paranoia and cruelty. By 660, Emperor Gaozong had suffered a series of strokes that left him partially paralyzed and dependent on Wu to read documents and communicate his wishes. Whether these strokes were natural or induced by slow poisoning remains a subject of historical debate. What is certain is that Wu used the emperor's incapacity to rule in his name, sitting behind a screen during court sessions and speaking for the increasingly feeble monarch. Officials who questioned this arrangement found themselves accused of treason, their confessions extracted through tortures that Wu personally supervised from behind her silk screen. The secret police network Wu established would become the most extensive surveillance system in ancient Chinese history. She recruited informants from every level of society, encouraging children to report on parents, wives on husbands, and servants on masters. Bronze urns were placed throughout the capital where citizens could deposit anonymous denunciations. Those accused faced a justice system where guilt was predetermined and trials were theatrical displays of state power. Wu introduced new torture devices with poetic names that belied their horrific purpose. The fairy donkey slowly crushed victims between wooden boards. The phoenix spreading wings dislocated shoulders and hips simultaneously. The climbing the fairy mountain suspended victims by their thumbs, while weights were added to their feet. When Emperor Gaozong finally died in 683, Wu's mask of the devoted widow lasted exactly as long as necessary to secure her position as regent for her son, Emperor Zhongzong. But when Zhongzong showed signs of independence, attempting to appoint his father-in-law to high office without her approval, Wu demonstrated the ruthlessness that had carried her from concubine to supreme power. She deposed her own son after only 54 days, exiling him to a remote province and installing his younger brother as Emperor Ruizong, who understood that his survival depended on complete obedience to his mother. The year 690 marked Wu Zetian's final transformation. Abandoning all pretense, she deposed her second son and declared herself Emperor of China, establishing the Zhou dynasty. The cosmic audacity of a woman claiming the mandate of heaven sent shockwaves through the empire. To legitimize her rule, Wu orchestrated a propaganda campaign of unprecedented scope. Buddhist monks were paid to discover ancient texts prophesying that a divine female ruler would bring paradise to earth. Stone tablets mysteriously appeared in rivers, bearing inscriptions supporting her reign. A white stone was found, with red veins spelling out prophecies of her divine mission, but the theological manipulation required backing by pure terror. Wu created a new class of secret police called the Cruel Officials, who competed to devise innovative tortures and uncover vast conspiracy networks that may or may not have existed. Zhou Xing and Lai Yunqian, her most notorious agents, turned interrogation into an art form of agony. They wrote manuals on torture techniques that would be secretly studied by intelligence services centuries later. One favorite method involved placing a heated metal crown on the victim's head while forcing them to stand on a gradually heating iron plate, creating a choice between burning their feet or their skull. The extent of Wu's purges defied comprehension. Historical records indicate that during her reign, over 3,000 officials were executed for treason, with countless more dying during interrogation. Entire aristocratic clans that had ruled for centuries were eliminated overnight. The Tang imperial family, from which she had seized power, was systematically destroyed. Princes were forced to commit suicide, princesses were murdered in their quarters, and even children were not spared. One particularly chilling account describes Wu ordering the execution of 12 grandsons of Emperor Taizong, the youngest being only 6 years old, to prevent any future claims to the throne. Yet even as Wu ruled through terror, she demonstrated administrative brilliance that transformed China. She reformed the civil service examination system, opening positions to talented commoners rather than just aristocrats. She expanded the empire's borders through successful military campaigns in Korea and Central Asia. She patronized art and literature, commissioning works that would become classics of Chinese culture. This paradox, a ruler who could discuss Buddhist philosophy in the morning and order mass executions in the afternoon, reveals the complexity of absolute power's corruption. The physical toll of maintaining such control became increasingly visible as Wu aged. Court paintings from her later years, carefully edited to flatter, still reveal a woman whose face had hardened into a mask of perpetual suspicion. She suffered from insomnia, afraid to sleep deeply lest assassins strike. Her food was tested by multiple tasters, and she changed bedchambers nightly. Palace servants reported that she would wake screaming from nightmares, calling out the names of those she had executed. The woman who had killed thousands now lived in constant fear of the death she had dealt so liberally to others. In 704, Wu's body began to fail dramatically. She suffered from what court physicians described as a wasting disease, likely diabetes complicated by kidney failure. Her skin took on a yellowish hue, and festering sores appeared on her legs that emitted a foul odor despite the best efforts of imperial doctors. The woman who had once captivated emperors with her beauty now required thick white makeup to hide the decay of her flesh. Her hands shook uncontrollably, making it impossible to hold the imperial seal she had wielded with such devastating effect. The palace during Wu's final months became a theater of the macabre. She insisted on continuing court sessions even as her body deteriorated, propped up on her throne with silk cushions, while cosmetics artists worked frantically to maintain the illusion of vitality. The stench of her rotting flesh was masked with intense burning of incense that made courtiers' eyes water. She would drift in and out of consciousness during audiences, sometimes suddenly screaming accusations at officials who had been dead for decades, as if their ghosts stood before her throne. As death approached, Wu's paranoia reached psychotic proportions. She ordered the execution of her most loyal supporters, convinced they were plotting against her. Zhang Yizhi and Zhang Changzong, Brothers who had served as her favorites and confidants for years were dragged from their beds and beheaded in the courtyard while Wu watched from her window, laughing maniacally as their blood stained the marble floors. She then ordered their bodies dismembered and fed to the palace dogs, claiming this would prevent their spirits from seeking revenge. The coup that finally ended Wu's reign came in February of 705, orchestrated by ministers who recognized that the empire was descending into chaos under a dying tyrant's increasingly erratic commands. They forced the 81-year-old Wu to abdicate in favor of her exiled son, Emperor Zhongzong, whom she had deposed 20 years earlier. The irony was not lost on contemporary observers. The woman who had eliminated her own children for power was now dethroned by the very son she had cast aside. Wu Zetian's final moments were spent in the palace wing reserved for retired emperors. Surrounded by Buddhist monks chanting sutras she could no longer hear through her delirium. Witnesses reported that she spent her last days in a state of terror, claiming to see the ghosts of Empress Wang and consort Xiao standing at her bedside, their faces bloated from drowning in wine. She would beg forgiveness from empty air, offering to restore titles and honors to families she had exterminated decades ago. Her last coherent words, according to the attending physician, were, "The throne is cold, so cold." When Wu Zetian died on December 16th, 705, her body had already begun decomposing from the diseases ravaging her system. The embalmers reported that her internal organs were so diseased they dissolved at the slightest touch. Her brain, when examined, showed unusual dark patches that modern medical experts believe might indicate heavy metal poisoning from the mercury-based cosmetics she used to maintain her appearance. The woman who had ruled through fear died consumed by it, her body reflecting the corruption of her soul. The immediate aftermath of Wu's death saw a systematic attempt to erase her from history. Her Zhou dynasty was declared illegitimate, and many of her reforms were reversed. The elaborate tomb she had constructed was sealed, and her commemorative stele was left blank, an unprecedented insult to a former sovereign. Yet the very effort to eliminate her memory ensured its preservation. Secret histories were written, hidden in monastery walls and private collections, documenting the full horror of her reign for future generations. What makes Wu Zetian's story particularly chilling is not just the scale of her crimes, but the calculated intelligence behind them. This was not a ruler driven mad by power, but one who embraced evil as a rational tool of governance. Every murder, every torture, every manipulation was carefully planned to achieve specific political objectives. She proved that human brilliance divorced from moral constraints could create suffering on an almost incomprehensible scale. The archaeological excavation of sites associated with Wu's reign has revealed disturbing evidence supporting the most horrific accounts of her rule. Mass graves discovered near the palace contain remains showing signs of systematic torture. Bone analysis reveals stress markers consistent with prolonged agony before death. Children's skeletons found among the victims confirm that Wu's purges spared no one. One particularly haunting discovery was a collection of small bronze urns containing what appears to be preserved human tongues, likely from officials who had spoken against her rule. Perhaps most disturbing is the discovery of Wu's personal papers, hidden in a secret compartment of her tomb and only recently decoded. These documents reveal a woman who was fully aware of her evil, but considered it necessary for maintaining power. She wrote detailed analyses of each execution, evaluating its effectiveness in spreading fear and preventing rebellion. She calculated the optimal frequency of purges to maintain terror without causing complete administrative collapse. Her notes on torture techniques include observations on psychological breaking points with the clinical detachment of a scientist conducting experiments. The legacy of Wu Zetian extends far beyond her death. influencing Chinese concepts of female power for centuries. Every ambitious woman in Chinese history would be compared to her, their actions scrutinized for signs of similar ruthlessness. The phrase, "hen crowing at dawn," used to describe women who sought political power, became a warning embedded in cultural consciousness. Yet paradoxically, Wu's reign also proved that women could rule as effectively, if as brutally, as men, challenging fundamental assumptions about gender and governance. Modern DNA analysis of remains from Wu's era has revealed another horrifying dimension to her rule. Many of the executed officials share genetic markers suggesting they were related, confirming historical accounts of entire bloodlines being exterminated. The systematic nature of these killings, targeting specific genetic lineages, represents an early form of genocide that predates similar practices by centuries. The scale of genetic diversity lost during Wu's purges may have had lasting impacts on Chinese aristocratic bloodlines. The psychological profile that emerges from studying Wu Zetian matches that of history's most dangerous psychopaths, combining high intelligence with complete absence of empathy. Yet unlike many tyrants who descended into madness, Wu maintained her intellectual faculties until the end, making her final descent into paranoid terror all the more tragic. She had the cognitive ability to recognize her own evil, but chose to embrace it rather than resist it. Contemporary accounts discovered in Korean and Japanese archives, written by foreign ambassadors who witnessed Wu's court, provide an outsider's perspective on her reign. They describe a court where fear was so pervasive that officials would weep with relief after surviving an audience with the empress. One Japanese monk wrote that the very air in the palace seemed poisoned with terror, and that he could feel evil emanating from the throne like heat from a forge. The question that haunts historians is whether Wu Zetian's cruelty was necessary for a woman to maintain power in ancient China, or whether it reflected her inherent nature. Recent analysis of her early writings before she gained significant power reveals disturbing patterns of manipulation and casual cruelty, even as a young concubine. A poem she wrote at 16 contains metaphors of consumption and dominance that psychiatrists identify as early indicators of psychopathic personality disorder. This suggests her evil was not created by power, but merely unleashed by it. In her final letter, discovered hidden in her tomb's antechamber, Wu Zetian left a message for future generations that chills the blood even today. She wrote, "I regret nothing but my mercy. Every enemy I spared returned to haunt me. Every child I allowed to live grew to threaten my throne. If I could rule again, I would drown the empire in blood from the first day to the last." This complete absence of remorse, even facing death and divine judgment, reveals a soul so corrupted that it had lost all connection to humanity. The physical examination of Wu's mummified remains, conducted under strict archaeological protocols, revealed one final, disturbing detail. Her hands, preserved by the tomb's unique conditions, still showed traces of human blood under the fingernails, suggesting she had personally participated in violence even in her final days. The woman who had ordered thousands of deaths had also reveled in inflicting pain with her own hands, finding pleasure in the immediate, visceral reality of suffering. As we reflect on Wu Zetian's reign, we confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of power and the human capacity for evil. Her story demonstrates that given the right circumstances, intelligence and capability can become tools of unprecedented cruelty. The empress who broke gender barriers also broke every boundary of human decency, proving that evil knows no gender, only opportunity. The blank stone stele that marks Wu Zetian's tomb stands as a monument to historical judgment. No words were carved upon it, because no words could adequately capture the horror of her reign. Yet in that silence lies a warning that echoes across centuries. When ambition divorces itself from conscience, when power becomes its own justification, when brilliance serves only the self, the result is not progress, but devastation that scars the collective memory of humanity. The most chilling aspect of Wu Zetian's story is not the blood she spilled, but the administrative competence with which she spilled it. She proved that systematic evil, organized and efficient, could masquerade as governance. Her reforms, her patronage of arts, her expansion of the empire, all built on a foundation of corpses, challenge us to examine how we judge historical figures. Can achievements excuse atrocities? Can progress justify purges? Wu Zetian died believing she would be remembered as China's greatest ruler, and in terms of pure power and achievement, perhaps she was right. But history remembers her as proof that when traditional constraints on power collapse, when accountability disappears, when fear replaces law, even the most advanced civilization can become a charnel house. The woman who claimed the mandate of heaven turned the Middle Kingdom into hell on earth, and her shadow still darkens the pages of history. Today, as we examine strongman politics and authoritarian rises across the globe, Wu Zetian's reign offers a warning from the depths of time. She showed us that terror can be institutionalized, that murder can be bureaucratized, that evil can wear the mask of efficiency. The empress who ruled through blood reminds us that power without conscience is not strength, but a disease that consumes both ruler and ruled. But perhaps the most haunting question remains unanswered in all the historical records and archaeological evidence. In those final moments, as Wu Zetian lay dying, surrounded by the ghosts of her victims, did she finally understand the price of her power? Or did she go to her grave still believing that the throne was worth any cost? Even the complete annihilation of her own soul, the blank stele over her tomb, suggests that some questions are too terrible to answer, some evils too profound for words. If dark tales from history like this fascinate you, subscribe now to uncover more hidden truths about humanity's most twisted rulers and their reigns of terror that shaped our world in ways we're only beginning to understand.